I'm Julia. I'm the president of Space City. Thank you all for being here. We're getting started just a little late, so thanks for your patience. We're really excited to have Jennifer here with us, and great to see you all. Thanks to our sponsors and our volunteers. And Susan is going to give Jennifer an introduction.
Jennifer is a provocateur of the first order. She wears her lightness with a steely edge and a honed Southern charm. She resurrects the postmodernists from Bob to Anthony to Michael and re-reveals their cheap formality and colors to add childhood memories of home and Heim, of feeling Heimlich in our grandmother's kitchens and pantries full of cake, candy, and frosting. Jennifer provokes us to open our still gendered pantries and look at our suburban neighborhoods, look at the formal treasuries herein, and forces us, no, she beguiles us, to look at the other 99% of our built environment, full of cheap asphalt shingles slipping over the plastic forms of suburban houses and the now desolate, lumpy shopping malls of our country's actual built environment, as an encyclopedic treasury of geometry, hats, ornamentation, and color, toy boxes full of overlooked form. She draws on her own family history here, as I learned last night, as the daughter of a family that supplied construction molding materials for the Southeast. So armed with that colorful vocabulary of hats and surfaces, molding, frosting, and cakes, she enters our forests. Our noble and ancient forests. With her now iconic Atlantic house, Jennifer provokes us to slather these new blank wood surfaces of the 21st century material cross-laminated timber. She outsurfaces their surfaces, their large mute blankness, and layers them with plastic wallpaper, shingles, and shiny vinyls, and provokes us to tell her how sacred our wood is, how it does not play well with plastic, and to stay down there in Auburn and Atlanta. But the constructive rigor and luminous spatiality of her now iconic house survives and outlives its plastic surfaces, reminding us of the myths that we architects tell ourselves about what is real and what is actual, and how, despite our myths, we build with so much plastic today in our buildings everywhere. Jennifer is a truth teller, and she leads a brilliant Harvard-esque band of savants when she edited one of the most valuable contributions to our collective understandings of the rapidly emerging new actor to our damned 20th century materials of building. Mass timber entered with its alphabet soup of names, CLT, GLT, NLT, and DLT. Her book, Blank, sharply reminds us, our sanctified holier-than-thou Pacific Northwesterners, Canadians, and tree huggers, that yes, hybridity and history have always been with us, and that the domino house is an idea about space, not concrete or wood, and that a lower carbon wood does not architecture make, that we still need to understand how to make these blanks into architecture, and that construction is not architecture yet. I'm grateful to Jennifer Bonner and proud to call her a friend. Also, I'm very curious to see how she continues to make architecture out of blanks in her next chapter post-Harvard, here in our Pacific Northwest, in our forests elsewhere, and in her brilliant practice at Mall. Jennifer Bonner.
Okay, thank you so much, Susan, for that introduction. I don't think anyone's ever written something that beautiful before, so I really appreciate it. I'm going to talk about Susan a little bit later in the talk, but I wanted to first start off by saying several thank yous. Firstly, I wanted to thank the graphic designers for this poster at Pentagram. It feels really like a mashup of bubble letters, a tech manual, and a diner menu. And this really resonates with me as someone who cares deeply about pop culture. And I want to thank Peter Miller Books and Zoe for having copies of the book available afterwards. There's going to be 5 here and then some down at the party location afterwards. And thank you for the banter leading up to this week. It was a lot of fun. Tonight is also very special for me because it's rare to kind of have this many friends and colleagues in the audience. There are friends and contractors, Terry Ducott, there's mentors, former students, and family members of my current employee. Hi to Sam's mom and sister. As I was preparing the talk, I noticed on my server filing system that this is the 76th talk that I've given in my career, 76. But it's really cool because it's the first talk that my 9-year-old daughter, Ray, has been able to join and watch tonight. And lastly, thank you to the many people who are Space.City, Kyle, Megan, Julia, and Grant, for the invitation to give this very rad talk inside the Seattle Public Library. And not many architects say their favorite building, but I'm just going to lay all my cards on the table and say that I think the Seattle Public Library is one of the most inspiring pieces of architecture of our century, and it's really an honor to be here tonight. So you all have seen the title of the talk, Work at the Mall, Candy, Sandwiches, and Hats, which is really an abbreviated list of the many different topics that have begun to define the architectural project in my practice. So let's start with mall. What's a mall? Mall partly has to do with being raised in North Alabama and the vast amount of time I spent in this mall in Huntsville. So I mean this physical mall in this image, but also the roving acronym MALL, which stands for Mass Architectural Loopty Loops, or multiple angles and little lines, or maximum arches with limited liability. And then sometimes I add a little C to the end if I'm wanting to sound more professional, LLC. I'm going to speak really about mass timber construction, including Haus Gables, a single-family residence in Atlanta, Georgia. This was from 2018. I'll introduce the blank book. I'll also show pitches to developers for multifamily housing project, a small lot urbanism, and a spec office tower, and I'm going to end with the blank house. But all of this is also just really about candy, sandwiches, and hats. Before I get to that work, I want to introduce the work of Mall through a series of images. I often am interested in starting architecture with a question rather than a sketch. And so here we are flying 4 drones around Haus Lange and Haus Esters to scan Mies van der Rohe's use of brick in these large picture windows. And this is located in Krefeld, Germany. So we had 2 drones flying around, scanning the rear back facades. They were in synchronization. These are kind of 2 twin-like houses. But 2 drones weren't enough, and we needed 4 in order to film the 2 drones doing the synchronization. So performance is very much a part of the mall recipe. We often look to things outside the discipline of architecture, found in pop culture, like sandwiches, picnics, candy, or candy shops, and dollhouses. I'm interested in the ordinary, like astroturf and stucco, and the everyday, like wedding photography, or everyday construction techniques, and how all this material can become the starting point for the architectural project. Mall is also interested in the project of representation, which I would argue is the only realm for the architect until she builds. It's the driving influence in all the work, and so for me, a representational project is the architectural project. So this is a project called Another Axon that snaps into view and looks like an axonometric drawing. But it only can see this view within the city from the top floor of a Hard Rock Cafe parking deck in Boston. And this is located on the Rose Kennedy Greenway. So we have an affinity for fake artificial materials, and then the kinds of materials that look like one thing, but are meant to represent another thing. So there's also an intentional link to art practice and the works of contemporary artists such as Barbara Caston. Caston's use of colored gel photography inspired a project titled Still Life, which became the driving force for an exhibition and publication at Harvard Graduate School of Design. In my first year of teaching, I was tasked with being a faculty editor of a 400-page book, which ultimately became a demonstration project back to the school, asking students and faculty how might they start to use more color in their work. Other artists like Mary Corse's white light paintings, where she painted with highway reflective glass beads for works inside the gallery. And this became the mall's cladding system for a 55-foot-long glowing brick facade in Atlanta. The work is admittedly graphic, and it uses techniques of redaction similar to that of John Baldessari's big circle dot seen here. In 2 accessory dwelling units for the City of Los Angeles' standard plan program. So lean-to ADU and big circle ADU references all-American lean-to sheds, while also reinterprets 2 Los Angeles architectural mainstays, the stucco box and the exaggerated false front. We draw from bungalows, constantly mixing the low and high, such as the white house, black trim trend that we see in pop culture. And then I would say that there's 2 distinct ways that color appears in my work. First, through the use of color blocking, so materials of color kind of block like inside of space. And the second would be through color gradients, so equal doses of pink and blue syrupy colors. And lastly, I'm drawn to
innovative material systems
like cross-laminated timber and the way it has the potential to reset the discipline of architecture. And so I'm going to demonstrate how CLT and its capacity for structural gymnastics can also have an implications on the aesthetic for domestic and public interiors. Okay, so the first project, Best Sandwiches, there was an interest in looking at something like a sub-sandwich, and really the obsession in pop culture where everyone's vying for the best, so the best pastrami sandwich, the best grilled cheese. We know that this is kind of an American phenomenon. And I'm interested in all 3 versions of this sandwich, which would be the real Dagwood sandwich when you do a Google search, also Klaus Oldenburg's giant BLT, which is this kind of soft sculpture that's like made of vinyl, and then our very own BLT at Mall. So I'm interested in figuring out a project between all 3 of these kind of spaces. So the project really questions the extruded floor plate in architecture and looks to stacking strategies that sandwiches have to offer, the discipline. It takes a certain amount of sandwich know-how to make an architectural stack. So you can kind of see like bread, cheese, lettuce, tomato. This is a BLT. Color and glitter are also important when making a stack. And then all the different layers of the stack offer different combinations of apertures. And so this is all intentional. The stack offers us multiple grounds and as a result, multiple elevations. Okay, so after I do this kind of work with models, drawings, the idea is then to take the conceptual or the massing model or the project and turn it into a real building. And so there was an idea the following year, this reminder, this is pre-COVID, to turn Best Sandwiches into a speculative office tower called Office Stack. And so this is a project that won a PA award back several years ago. It's a mid-rise tower, and no longer will KPMG kind of be the main tenant of towers, I think, moving forward, but that there's a possibility that multiple tenants would happen within a sandwich stack, and they could all have their own identity and their own kind of chunk within the space. And then they're kind of connected together through mini atria and have their own circulation systems. And here's some of the plans. And then if there are any developers in the room, I don't know if any were able to make it out tonight. You know, I like pink, it's very clear, but I can also do gray if that's what y'all need. So I just wanted to give the example. But pink looks better, right? Okay, the next project is domestic hats. And this is, you know, the real obsession around kind of studying everything to do with the roof. So that would be hips, ridges, dormers, valleys, soffits, gables, and not to be concerned with anything else in architecture. So these are the kind of roof typologies that we have available to us. And I would say that in this body of work, I was really interested in the contractor canon, like what we're seeing made across the US in suburbia or in the kind of spec homes. And then I would go as far as to say that, you know, the kind of single family house and its roof structure might be equivalent to, say, like the European cathedral, right? There's a lot of angles, there's a lot of know-how, there's a lot of knowledge, and there's a lot of geometry and expression, which is really fascinating if you look at it from that perspective. Studying all the roof pitches, most roof pitches are under 12 to 12, but everything that's actually implemented in Haus Gables is above 12 to 12. So like things like 14 to 12, 17 to 12, 19 to 12. So there's an exaggeration of the roof pitch that I'm proposing. And then also to look at how we usually build these houses. So they have a lot of expression, but we're usually building them in a vented roof system. And so you walk into the homes and they have flat ceilings and it's all covered in drywall. So the proposal here is that we make more spaces that are using unvented roof systems. And so in order to be able to work on the project of the ordinary, you have to kind of look really closely at it and read it. So in this figure 1, there's a gable covered by a hip roof. In figure 2, there's intersected gables with an offset shed flap. In figure 3, there's a chamfered triple hip with asymmetrically extruded gables. In figure 4, there's stacked, stretched, and clipped gables, or otherwise known as the gable stack. And figure 5, we have a front-facing gable with a camel-backed hip, plus a rotated gable bump, and it's in the back. So you have to really kind of get into and obsess, and you can make up any names you want, and you can call them whatever you want, and it's a lot of fun. So we sat down with my research assistants at Georgia Tech, and we started, we took a survey of 50 houses in the Atlanta area in Georgia, and we cut across 8 different neighborhoods. And so we were looking at houses in Buckhead. That would be object number 21. This is an affluent part of town, and there might be like 10 there might be 10 roof forms that make up one villa. And then somewhere like in Cabbagetown, object number 41, there's a simple shotgun house, and so it has one hip and a gable roof. And so I'm interested in the socioeconomic spread and also the geometrical difference between these 50 houses. And so I was called by the AIA Young Architects Forum, and they said, you've just won an award as the emerging architect. And they said, you're going to get a solo show. And they said it's going to be at the Goat Farm, which is art center in Atlanta. And I was like, well, great, but I don't have any work. And so the idea was to take this project and rather than study the architecture in these kind of small models, to blow up the massing model at the scale that would actually just be inflated to fit inside of this gallery space. So sometimes you work backwards. What's the space, and then what can I make to fill the interior? But what it did was really push this notion of representation. Like oftentimes we make massing models and they have no detail to them. In this case, I made these like mega massing models. They don't fit on a car. They don't fit on a conference room table. They certainly don't fit on a desk. And really looking at the architecture of the roof and nothing else. So adding no more detail. There's no fenestration, there's no windows, there's no materiality. In this case, there's no like soffits. So these are the 16 massing models. And we then took the models back out into the context of the houses that we had originally sampled. And I worked with a photographer that used a large format camera and created these images. So in one sense, they were like yard art, but they were also like, this was a political campaign, and this became the postcard for the opening for the show, because we wanted Michelle Nunn to be the U.S. Senator. So that was the precursor, Domestic Hats, to Haus Gables. So like Best Sandwiches that I just showed you, the conceptual model is on the left, and the idea is to build the one-to-one model on the right. So all the talk about all the different types of roofs, in this case, I took one of the models that was only dealing with gables. So this is a pair of 6 gables that have all different roof pitches that have been kind of crashed together. And I'm not going to tell you my secret recipe for that, and the idea here is that these are the kind of diagrams and spatial paradigms that we know as architects, the free plan, the ROM plan. And I'm basically suggesting a new plan, which would be called the roof plan, where the roof geometry is actually imposing logic onto the spatiality of a project. So get rid of the old diagrams and like start working on something else. And that's available for everyone to use. These are the 2 plans for Haus Gables. The first floor plan looks like it has nothing to do with the roof, but the second floor plan has all the roof geometry and the ridges kind of drawn on. Sometimes they hit the corners of rooms. Sometimes they set up the directionality, like the catwalk there at number 3. But what we get from this kind of roof plan project is this opportunity for rooms to be nested inside of larger roof rooms, nested inside a larger roofscape. So you can see that in the first section on the left. And so this is the view of that part of the project. So this is one of my favorite views of the house interior, where the bedroom looks like kind of an elementary version of house, right? You can see the figure of the gable. And that's basically being hung off of the other CLT panels. So this is the moment that the structure is performing and the larger roofscape is acting as a folded plate. And then all the forces are kind of coming down that guardrail down to the first floor, where there's a traditionally framed floor and a steel beam. So this sets up both the pictorial version of the architecture that I want to make and the structural concept that's kind of married to it. And so I think the promise of the kind of roof plan as a thesis is that if we start to build smaller footprints in these kind of in-town urban neighborhoods, then we need more volumetric space. So smaller footprint, more volumetric space, like cut-throughs to the catwalk and the living room down to the kitchen. I often don't talk about site and program, but I think it's important here that this is an infill site in a near to a historic neighborhood in Atlanta. And the width of the lot is 24 feet wide. And on the back side is something called the Atlanta Beltline. And so there were 3 houses just about 6 feet apart on either side. And if anyone knows what's happening in terms of the urbanism and development of Atlanta, there is a former Rust Belt ring going around the city, and it cuts through 45 different in-town neighborhoods. And so the first time Atlantans are now walking and using that public space in a very active way. Very exciting.
The article perpetuates the stereotypes of Northerners looking down on Southerners, but in this case, the Atlanta Beltline is an exciting project that's changing the way that Atlantans use urban public space in the city.
So we're diving right into the construction of the house. So Terry Ducott is the installer here. Do you see him on the roof that long piece. He's also with us here tonight. So this is really special for me to be able to kind of be really proud of the team that helped install this project. The walls are made of 3-ply CLT. The floor is made out of 7-ply. All this, and the roof is 5-ply, and all this is sitting on top of a traditionally framed concrete box. Terry and 3 others with a crane operator installed the whole project in 14 days. There were 87 different unique panels that were cut. And I'm just extremely thankful for the opportunity to work together and to get this done. The product came from Austria, KLH. I showed you the widths of the lot, so I'm using both neighbors' lot, one to lay down the material and one to park the crane. And then we see like a view of Atlanta to John Portman's architecture, who was both an architect and a developer, and invented something called the super atrium. Yeah, so here's Terry and his crew, and I'm extremely thankful. Really, the world works on a series of relationships. And as a young architect, working with an engineer out of London who had pushed me to look at CLT, I remember a really distinct conversation we had, and I said, "Honey, what's CLT?" I didn't. This was in 2015. And he was like, "Okay, Jennifer, this is going to be a steep learning curve, but it's going to make a lot of noise." I was then told about Susan Jones's house here in Seattle, the CLT house, and was told that I had to give her a call and get on the phone with her. And for me, as a female architect, seeing another female architect just deliver one of the most important houses in the country, it gave me a lot of confidence, because this is really risky business, right? What if one of the 87 panels didn't fit? Or what if, many things could go wrong. Terry couldn't really just go to Home Depot and buy another panel, right? So there's a lot of risk involved, and it helps when you have a network of people around you that are cheerleading and supporting and there to pick up the phone when things go wrong. So I'm forever grateful for that, both formation of the team, advice, and getting to work with fun people. You all live in the Pacific Northwest. You already know what CLT is, but most of the time I give talks, I have to explain what the material is. And then to talk a little bit about the faux finishes on the interior, we'll get to in just a second. People always ask, why did you use Austrian product and not use manufacturers here in the North America? At the time, there was no manufacturer that could flip mill these panels and get the kind of precision that we needed. So 75% of the 3-ply wall panels were flip milled. So that's like most of the walls. And then 100% of the 5-ply roof panels were flip milled. And so the geometry was actually, these are like compound miter cuts that are being cut with a CNC machine, and they're down to like an 1/8 of an inch tolerance. And so this is kind of the virgin product here right off the trailer. And so all these CLT panels started to arrive on site with precision, but all the background story to get us to this place was to talk through several details of how we were going to build this. And it's really basic things about which side of the panel is going to be on the interior and the exposed surface, where's the screws going, what do the joints look like. At the corner, you can do a rabbet joint, you could do a butt joint. And then we had the complications of multiple roof connections between wall and roof panel, and how all the screws would either be hidden or exposed or plugged within the house. Also thinking through the mechanical system, right? So I talked about that traditionally framed floor that sits on top of the garage and the concrete box. So that's pushing forced air up into the project. And then on the top floor, we have ductless mini splits that are pushing air down, and that there's 3 of them in the upstairs area. The pre-planning for something like this is intense. We made a kind of diagram of each panel, and if there's 87 panels. There's 87 drawings. So this was kind of an IKEA cartoon drawing set that we were working through with both Terry, the installer, and our engineering team at Benson Wood. And, you know, the connection for the drive angle of the screw, how the two panels go together. And as you can see, as we move through these drawings, and now we're looking at like the roof panels, the details get more and more complicated, but they're all, you know, on this one panel number 63, there's 3 drawings that needs to be considered. And that's the prep work on the ground before you hoist the panel into place. And so this is the kind of erection sequence drawing that we worked on for probably about a month before the panels arrived on site. What's exciting about CLT is the way that the shop drawings are like baked into the manufacturing. And so where we're going to pick the panel up, that's all loaded in a particular way. Again, you see here the crane is parked on a neighbor's property, and then the laydown lot is on the other neighbor's. And then we had all these panels trucked in from the Port of Savannah, which were about 11 hotshot trailers that would come and make a spectacle on the street and sometimes blocking the street. And you can see how, on this sped up view, how fast Terry and his team are putting everything together. Yeah, there were 4 engineers on this project, a lot of coordination from in advance. On the very first day, this is what the site looked like. It looked like to me like half the house was already built, and I was just like, how could this, you know, go so quick? It was also the moment that I'm looking at the project and it feels like the architectural model. It looks like a foam core or a chipboard model laying on our desk. And so again, for an architect that's interested in the role of representation in architecture, I think CLT has a big possibility and potential for the discipline. It's really heavy, but it looks kind of paper thin and fragile. And this was KLH's factory. Hanif Kara from AKT2 sent over engineers from London to inspect the panels before they were shipped. And they took these photos and sent them back to me. And I want to just remind you of this image when we get to the blank book later. So I'm looking at this really big panel that's on the factory line here. And remember, in Haus Gables, we're cutting them all up into smaller pieces. But this was an influential picture to me. And then here's the shipping containers that they sent over to the Port of Savannah from Austria. Also, architects usually don't get involved in like logistics and how to load up the panels in reverse order, but we were kind of taking KLH's shop drawings and then also reverse the layering so that when Terry picked the panel off, it would be ready to go on the bottom, and then we'd have panel 1 at the very top of the stack. Kind of worked out that way, didn't it? And I think when working on the project of the ordinary and all those kind of original roof structures that I showed that we kind of obsessed over and studied, then when you take the drone up and you see that this roof just 2 houses down is kind of in perfect alignment with the roof on our project, it kind of makes sense that something like that would happen. And then just to say, like, this was my first project built, and it's extremely liberating to walk on the site. All of y'all know that are on construction sites regularly, and for me, it was really special to have my daughter there, kind of watching this whole process. We brought in a photographer to photograph the raw CLT, so to show where all the brackets are and how the product gets kind of dinged up during the construction process, but also to see the space in its kind of raw setting in a kind of industrialized way just after it's been put together. And you can really see how the light works and how the spaces start to be formed. And then there's a lot of layers to the CLT, so that the wall panel, the interior is the final finish, and then everything else goes outbound of the CLT panel. like the water barrier, and then a 3-dimensional mesh so that water drains down off the wood and isn't kind of sitting there over time. We had to put a layer of dense glass due to the kind of 6 feet away from the neighbor's house. There was a concern from the city of Atlanta. Otherwise, we got this through the city of Atlanta very quickly, and just like total support of building the first CLT house in that part of the country. And this is a photograph from the architectural photographer Tim Hersley out of Arkansas. And we worked with Tim to take a lot of the photographs. And this is one of my favorite views of the exterior of the house. It looks kind of spooky, and it's really strange to me that I've seen the project so much on my computer, but until a photographer kind of snaps this view into place, you see the project kind of with a new lens. And then the goal here is that this image really creates, if you kind of squint your eyes, you can see that it really mimics the domestic cats project, right? So the foam massing model or mega massing model is now a built one-to-one in the city, in the urban space. And then to talk about all these plastic materials that Susan was talking about in her introduction, I was interested in the Southern Institute of Faux Finishing. It's located in Brandon, Mississippi. I don't know if anyone's ever been. I've never been, but I want to go sometime soon. I'm interested in how Southerners think about materiality. And so this is a porcelain bathtub, but we need it to look marble because we need to upgrade our materials. And then also coming from like high art, it's exciting that Mary Corse would take something that the Department of Transportation uses, these like glass beads that are the reflections on the road striping, and then brings that into the gallery and uses it in her paintings. And so these are the kind of things that I'm wrestling with and working with a research assistant at Harvard. And we created these like faux tooling things, which are like a roller or the stamp. And we made kind of mock-ups at the scale of 1-to-1 for this cementitious stucco. And as I started to call subcontractors in the Atlanta area, I was telling them about this fake brick process that I wanted to make. And they said, oh, well, we've already installed that on an Arby's around the corner. So I don't know why I was spending all the time at Harvard trying to research a way to make new materials, but it's a product, and it's like a sticker, and you stick it on, and the last layer of stucco is troweled on, and then you peel it off, and that gives you like an 1/8 inch of a reveal, and you can have fake bricks on your stucco. But what Arby's does not have, that Haus Gables has, is a dash finish of these glass beads at the very end. So it's kind of, reflective and sparkly. This notion of these faux finishes was tested out on a 1-to-12 scale dollhouse. And each room had different faux finishes attached to them. They had their own logic per room. And here they are as a set of products that you can purchase and buy. So I'm like speccing what I was considering faux finishes. So you either made the cut or it didn't. So it's things like yellow vinyl that's typically used in hospitals. There would be terrazzo, but not terrazzo that's made on site and poured in place, just a thin tile set. And then things like this one, which is like somebody in Spain had gotten really cute and funny and had made OSB board into a ceramic tile. So these are the kind of material sections and floor plans. And so you can see that we're using the materials both in a color blocking way and then to subdivide the space. And so this is one of the 55-foot long views through the project. You're in like a gray bedroom that looks kind of like concrete, and it's vinyl, yellow to black. And then the faux finishes also are functional. So they become the backsplash at the kitchen countertop, and then kind of dive down to like maybe 2 feet off the ground on the other side of the room. And behind there, we've routed in the electrical runs, and the faux finishes are kind of acting as like stickers to kind of cover up that electrical. And I mean, also it just needs more geometry, right? There's not enough going on or something. The photographs are by, the interiors are by Naro, a female duo out of London. And Marcella, that took these photographs, used to work as an architect with Zaha Hadid. And very interesting that, the way she sees the world through her angles and views was very similarly mapped onto her previous work with Zaha. So I don't think another photographer could have gotten these kind of moments within the house. And then, of course, we had fun with it as well. So if I'm going to be an architect that makes dollhouses and plays with dollhouses, then you kind of have to dress up to enact the architectural photograph at the same time. So the house has kind of 2 spaces that are really white, and it would be this upper terrace level that's seemingly white, and then also at the base of the house in the garage, this is like all glossy powder-coated white panels, and everything's like super high gloss, so that the garage isn't just a garage, but that it could also be like an art gallery. And then again, we're playing around, right? I'm like, what are all these buckets doing here? Which might have been a little bit of an omen because the roof did leak at the beginning of the construction process. And I don't know, maybe this is some kind of premonition of what happened. Okay, so after Haus Gables, I went on a bit of a tour and gave a lot of lectures. And every time someone at the end of the talk would ask me about cost. So basically everybody's trying to figure out, can this be the next model? And I don't know, but what I did know is that if they maybe started to multiply, or there would be more than one, could we get the pro forma to work out? And so I made a project called X houses, 10 houses, and it's really looking at small lot urbanism. This would be modeled off of someone's project like Jonathan Tate out of New Orleans, or Barbara Bester's Blackbirds in Los Angeles. So this incentive that we all don't need garages, we could park in like this parking pavilion that you see as the largest structure, and kind of walk very closely to your front door. And so this is how this would work. So these are all single family homes, but in a very compressed, tightened urban lot. And so the idea that the big roof is like the element of the house, but it's also the element of the community, looking at the traditional shotgun house in New Orleans and the camelback house, and then how to like not make a discontinuous camelback, but how to make it a continuous. And the idea here is that it would also be made out of the CLT panels, and that it would be a copy-paste. So this is the same exact house. KLH or any manufacturing company could cut the same house 10 times with the same files. But it's the way in which we've arranged it on site and mirrored it and rotated it to create kind of this urbanism amongst each other. And then, this next portion, I'm going to talk about the book. So remember that image that I showed in the KLH factory in Austria? I mean, basically, this is a 50-foot long panel by 9-foot panel. As you all know, this is based on shipping containers and truck transportation. But I started to think about it differently after I saw it being kind of dangled from the crane in the air and slid into place. And I was thinking about how 4x8 plywood sheets have a certain scale to them. They're at Home Depot, and there's an industrialized way of looking at it. And so because I cut them all up in Haus Gables, the basis of a studio with Hanif Kara, the structural engineer at Harvard, was to ask students to really think about the blank. Now, most manufacturers don't call them blanks. This is a name that we've thrown down. They call it like a billet. Sometimes they use that term. But the blank has a level of abstraction to it, and it could really get us start to think about the materiality in mass timber in a different way. So we had 14 students in the studio, and we asked them in the course of a studio to design 14 houses and 14 towers. And through pedagogy and our position on mass timber and the project, which was to say to the students, what do we do with this industrialized object? Do you try to have the blank register in its whole and its entirety in the project? Does it show up in the reading, or do we cut them up and you kind of deny the reading of the blank? And so you can see a variety of results from the students. After that studio, Hanif says, Jennifer, we have to make a book. And, that studio happened during COVID shutdown. So half of the studio was online. And Hanif really wanted to do a book during the COVID shutdown in London because he has so much energy. And it was really wonderful to have conversations with the people we asked to participate in the book. Someone like Nedar Chorani has been using mass timber and plywood his entire career. So he writes an article through the lens of this desire. We all want monolithic or material architecture at the moment. That seems to be something that's in, but that there's we always work in laminar systems. And so this essay really tries to kind of figure out a new way. Yasmin Vobis was one of my colleagues at Harvard, and she wants to talk about the representation of CLT and proposes this essay, The 10 Points on CLT Models. And then she herself built this pavilion at the Chicago Biennale that is really like photographs like a model itself. And then there's architects like Sam Jacob out of London that has never built anything with CLT or mass timber, but we thought he'd have something to say about the drawing of CLT and the wall and the surface. His work at his former firm, FAT, is known for the kind of flatness and the graphicness, and I think CLT would be really in his wheelhouse. We also asked architect Sean Canty to think about CLT and this notion of blankness. He's really interested in curvature in his work. So he started to work with AKT out of London and Hanif and looked at making these structural cassettes. And then this is a very interesting essay by a historian of plywood named Erin Pudalik. So she's offering up, she had kind of obsessed for 7 years over plywood, and I was like, excellent.
She discovered an experimental female architect named Eleanor Raymond, who was one of the first architects using plywood as an exterior cladding system. And Eleanor's work in Massachusetts actually predates the work of Walter Gropius, who is the more well-known architect in history.
She's got two clients. One is a traditional client on the right side who wanted the plywood cladding to be ripped down so that it looked like siding boards. This is New England. And then the house on the left, she had a more modern client who wanted, that was okay with seeing the 4x8 sheet as like a whole material unit on the facade system. Again, her work has not been published. It's in the book. It's very exciting to see. But it takes a female historian of plywood to find the female architect in 1940, because otherwise we're just going to keep talking about Gropius. We're also very interested in the role that art has to play in the discipline as it relates to blankness or the blank. Lauren Halsey is a Los Angeles-based artist that contributed to the book. You'd know her recent work, which was the pavilion on top of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City last summer. And she is kind of scribing and cutting and drawing messages and bricks and other pictures into drywall inside the gallery. To me, this is very translatable into the CLT surface and what a robot and a CNC machine can do. Jennifer Bolande, another Southern California artist who has these kind of plywood curtains. And so we're really interested at what these artists are doing and how they might fold back into architecture. The book was designed by Neil Donnelly out of Brooklyn, and he had to learn what CLT was and how the cross-lamination worked. And so you can see through his graphic convention that when he forced the reader to turn the book ever so often. And this is when we're looking at drawings from the students that we published in between all the essays. And so the layering of a CLT panel is now also the kind of way and system that you flip and use the book. And so these drawings are of the students' projects, renderings. These are panel assembly renderings of towers and houses, and the kind of the structural analytics that was looked at by AKT's office. This book was co-edited with Hanif Kara, as I mentioned, and then at the very end of the book, the students made these kind of projections about the future of CLT that I think are just as exciting as the kind of long-form essays in the book. So that's my book pitch. Did I do good, Peter? The next project is called 4/9. Now, this was a project in my office directly after teaching that studio. So you'll see how the pedagogical experiment in the studio then kind of works towards the kind of projects we take on in the summer at Mall. And then I think Susan is very much involved in leading Mass Timber in terms of the code, and was sitting on the national team that got this implemented across the country, which would be the Type 4 heavy timber category where CLT and Mass Timber now sit. So I'm looking at, for this project, all the construction types, type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're focusing on type 5 over type 1. And so that's the wood frame over a non-combustible concrete or steel building at the base. And the invention of it was in 1990 in Los Angeles by Tim Smith. The legend is he was in Hawaii on vacation and looking at the code book and puts together these assemblies, right? And we know, thank you, Tim Smith, now we have this kind of architecture kind of very prevalent in every American city. So if we use my domestic hats logic, what can we learn and study from this, and how can we push it to something else? I didn't really want to study what my team kind of made this text. I did not make it, but I do kind of think it's very funny the way in which we could call these projects across the country. Does any of that resonate? So what if we just go straight to type 4 and then put it not over a layer of type 1? And so this is a developer pitch. They're kind of advertisements. This is Lemonade. And these are all using CLT panels for like 6-story buildings. We looked at the Portland block as like a kind of development area, and different ways we could use the panel to make the exterior walls. So here's like kind of cutaway views. And so if you're thinking about that 50-foot long, 9-foot long blank, very quickly, if you put 4 together, you've got a 200-foot long block. And I think these things could create urbanism in really unique ways. We can also cut and draw and make figures out of them. And the precedent here is the Kinney Plywood House by Diller and Scafidio. This is 1981, in where they have the plywood expressed as the 4x8 sheet on the exterior. And so I'm saying, can't we use the CLT blank as a registration device for the exterior facade for housing development? Yeah, very interested in how these blanks kind of lay out on site, and always with a mind to construction, how to get depth into the facade out of these like really kind of flat generic 5/1s. Okay, this is the last project. So, a few small lot urbanism, the 4/none, which is looking at a multifamily product, and then this last project is the blank house. So, there was an idea in Portland to do kind of a Haus Gables part 2, and then I was like, no, the Haus Gables diagram has been built, and now there's another diagram that needs to be built after this kind of blank logic. So in this case, there's no roof. There is a roof. There's a flat roof. There's no gables, and the blank is like 7 feet 4 inches wide, up to like 30 feet tall. And here's where the candy comes in. So, looking at the massing studies, Matt, these are your renderings. There you are. Candy canes, lollipops, hard candy from grandma's house, all the different things. Looking at the potential in having an accessory dwelling unit with a single family house and the kind of connections between the two. So candy is a figural thing, but then also when we get to the final design, it could just be the kind of crinkle in the plan or the crinkle of the wrapper. And so the idea is not to take the metaphor of candy and then see it directly in the house, but that there's some kind of level of abstraction. And then this image specifically goes back to the work about still life that I had showed you from the Harvard exhibition and publication, that the house is on a slope that's more than 20%. It's in the city of Portland. It overlooks the Albina rail yard, but it also has candy inside. But it's really fun to me to flip from candy to like the details of how to make these CLT panels come together, what you actually need to do to make these crenellated facades, crinkle facade, and really looking at, how these 7 foot 4 inch blanks can kind of make the perimeter of the project. It's a flat roof, and to think of them as distinct elements, then the windows are cut out of them. So you can see the logic. You can read the blank, right? On the interior, we take the blanks off. Again, thinking about techniques of the still life and the domestic backdrop and setting. So the kind of mundane, everyday kitchen or duties of folding clothes or whatever looks a little bit more exciting with these like material backdrops that are both reflective and shiny and pink and stripy. And then this is the lower floor plan. There's 3 beds on that level. You can kind of see the candy cane stair coming down, or this is the main level. There's kind of 3 big tables. They're kind of hard to see in the plan on this level. And you can see the crinkled facade. Obviously, the candy cane jumps out. And then on the mezzanine level, there's like 3 leisure spaces. So that's kind of the programmatic stack in the blank house. And this notion of like candy being submerged or hanging from the CLT roof panels. In some cases, you have double height space with objects floating. Sometimes there's the 3-layer stack. Sometimes there's kind of a double height space over a very narrow office space. And then here I was working with food photographer Dina Avila from Portland. And we created this image, which feels very Pacific Northwest to me, but also a little candy too. These are AI-generated trees from Oregon. And then, of course, I couldn't help myself. You have to bring the pink in somehow, so pink light and pink backdrop. So, in conclusion, I hope that it's apparent that there's ways of using conceptual ideas in architecture for maybe more in art practice, but also like just combining that with the technical rigor of a materiality like CLT. I don't know, it's been super helpful to kind of be able to do both, because until Haus Gables was built, I think if I gave this lecture, none of you all would believe anything I said. So I just want to inspire anyone who does not want to take a traditional path into architecture. There are many ways that you can make your architecture. And yeah.
The last thing I wanted to mention tonight is a desire to step away from academia and focus all of my time in practice. I've teamed up with 2 design partners, Jermaine Barnes and Christian Stainer. We are Barnes Architects. And in collaboration with a local Texas partner, Dennis Chiesa of CH Studio, we have recently been awarded a large commission to design a cultural hub inside a former KKK headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas. So our client is a coalition of 8 nonprofits called Transform 1012. So just wanted to say, be on the lookout as we develop the Fred Rouse Center for Arts and Cultural Healing. Thank you very much.